Hi, everyone. Want to welcome you back to the VBC One Take Studio. This week, we have an excellent guest. I'm really excited to interview him, especially with all the talk around technology and AI and how that's going to be so important to our healthcare landscape. Please help me welcome Chetan Parihk, who is CEO and founder of RAAPID. And looking forward to having a discussion with him today. Hi, Chetan. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Shannon. Really a pleasure and an honor to talk with you today. So doing fantastic on a Saturday morning. Very excited about the upcoming Rise West as well. So all yours.
Awesome. I was going to say we are working all the time and very passionate about the work that we do. So it is Saturday morning, but I'm really excited for our discussion. And I think it couldn't be more timely, especially because we're headed to Rise West and just looking at the agenda and the topics that are of mind. But before we get into that, I want to make sure that our listenership has an opportunity to get to know you and understand your background. And I think it would be great for them to hear, because you've shared it with me, your story coming to healthcare.
Yeah, sure. I think coming into healthcare was absolutely by design and a lot of thought went into it. So by training, I'm a chemical engineer. I used to work as a chemical engineer at GE many years ago. But somehow it dawned on me that while engineering gave me a fantastic background, I think my real passion was to do something more meaningful. And I could not imagine anything more meaningful than two areas. One is education and the second is healthcare. Because in my eyes, one is nurturing life to live a good life. And the other is ensuring that you have a good life, healthy life, so you can do good things. And I think as chance would have it, or as God would have it, when you really desire, things come to fruition. And so at that time, there was an acute need in 2002 for medical transcriptions. So I got into healthcare, helping a very dear friend of mine set up detailed Six Sigma processes on medical transcriptions. And I got very excited because thought that I was able to help get the right information to the right person, which is the accurate transcript to the provider at the right time so that they can save a life, was very empowering. And so I decided to leave my chemical engineering background and get into healthcare. As you always gravitate back to areas that you are really interested in. And what interested me was understanding the deeper meaning within the transcribed notes that we were generating. And so in 2008, 2009, I decided to go out and see if we can understand automatically all these transcribed notes and put that information in front of the provider. So you have not only good information at the right time, but accurate and timely information with synoptic understanding in front of the provider. And so didn't find any technologies which I believed were good enough at that time. Mostly they were from academia. So set out to develop our own NLP. And I think that was an amazing experience. Got in touch with some amazing, passionate, equally passionate healthcare people, as well as computer science folks and data scientists and computational linguists. Brought a team together and developed our own NLP and launched a company by the name of EasyDI, which was essentially a way to get from easy way to get from data to intelligence. And it focused on computer assisted coding and CDI. So we launched that company, grew that company, and in 2021 had this opportunity to exit from it. But at that point, Shannon, I was very clear that the future in my eyes was not going to be in the fee for service for multiple reasons. Finance is one very important reason you cannot sustain it. But as I'm getting older, I realize that managing chronic conditions with high accuracy at the right time is very important. And I started to see, or at least observe, that healthcare was more about sick care. And it was not focusing on the underlying core issues of a patient. It was more symptomatic. And the only way to do it was to start going into the value-based care side of it, which was very focused on the Medicare, the older population, as well as the Medicaid side, because that was more focused on the population which did not have access to healthcare as easily. And the way to do it was to really get into risk adjustment. And so when I sold the company, I kept some of the core technologies and some of the research people I had and decided to start Rapid. So that has been a very meaningful journey for me, and could not ask for a better career path than where I am today.
Awesome. I would like to take a step back just a little bit because I think you're the perfect person to answer this question and make it all straight for us. For those that may not know that are listening, if you could take a moment to explain NLP, AI, LLM, all the different acronyms that are out there around technology and healthcare today.
Sure. So this artificial intelligence is looking at large amount of data and making sense out of it. So whether it is you do a very simple arithmetic modeling or you do a very complex statistical modeling, that is what artificial intelligence is, that you look at data and start predicting the next step or the future of what you want to see or what could be from that data set. Now, when it comes to discrete numeral data, any kind of applying statistics is much easier. But when you look at the complexity of human language and the understanding of human language is very difficult for computers. So until I would say 15, 20 years ago, computers were getting better and better in one thing, which is process large amount of data and retain a lot of memory. But they were not understanding the data. So they were much faster than humans and much more in remembering things. But as compared to a human, they were not even close. Then the first step in my eyes came when people started looking into machine learning and deep learning, which really improved or at least started to give a feel that computers were understanding. But they were not. They were still just statistical, very sophisticated statistical models to predict. Google came up with amazing technologies where they could recognize and differentiate a dog from a cat, from an image. There wasn't any magic to it. It was just pure computational power and statistical models. The magic started to happen when people started to understand the English language. They started with English language, and that was natural language processing or natural language understanding. And language, Shannon, is nothing but a group of concepts or words which are attached together, and the attachment or the linkages have certain underlying rules that you can only attach this and it means this. And when you feed all these rules into the computer, now the computer can read a sentence and say, okay, this word is a noun and it is a proper noun. This is an adjective. This is an adverb. This is a word. And all the conjunctions that attach it, they give a meaning to it. So there is this understanding that the computer started to gain, and that is natural language processing, that is NLP. Now, while we are working on NLP, a big push came when the computing power has been increasing and growing exponentially, right? That's the Moore's law. Now, what has happened is with the sophistication of GPUs, the TPUs from Google, the amount of data that you can compute and retain while you are competing is super high. And these things have led to looking in what is known as large language models. What it means is, and just very simply speaking, Shannon, generative AI, the word itself explains what is generating the next word. So Gen AI is nothing but it is generating. So when it looks at a question, it understands it based on the NLP that I explained. And once it understands the contextual meaning and what is the semantic and the syntactic meaning of it, it is now able to take it and start generating the next one. And that is what is very exciting, because with the large computational capabilities, what OpenAI or Gemini or Meta are doing is they are giving the entire world of knowledge to it, all the information that is out there on the internet, all the books and everything, and saying, okay, now you have the knowledge in your background, automatically generate words and try to understand it. And this is the magic. This is the magic. However, this is very important, and people will talk about black box or non-explainability of AI or hallucinations. And these are real, but they are improving tremendously. So let's talk about hallucination. When generative AI starts to generate the next word, it is looking at it from contextual perspective as well as it is looking from grammatical perspective and generating a sentence, and it knows when to terminate. But if it goes on a path where it just assumes certain things for just one node, it assumes it can go on a different path. And that assumption now becomes multiplicative. And that is hallucination. So it makes things up after that, because it is just generating, it is contextually correct to the previous word on the previous context, but it made one small error in understanding one thing, and contextually it is out of scope. So that hallucination can lead to wrong results. And in healthcare, absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely. The other thing is explainability. Again, that is also improved tremendously. That now LLMs can point to the data or from which it started to build it and where it is finding the evidence to give the answers that it is giving. So that I think that the future is going to be in Gen AI. It's the agentic AI, because a lot of problems that we were seeing in NLP, because NLP, as I mentioned, is nothing but understanding the grammatical structure of a sentence and its context window into which it can observe. Our vision goes to a certain periphery, up, down, and then beyond that, we cannot see. Beyond that, we have to change our mind. But when we change our face direction, it is not able to see in another direction. Just like that, the contextual window of NLP is small, maybe one or two paragraphs. And that's one problem. The second problem is, since it cannot see and not retain the information, it cannot make all the dots connect. While the LLM is able to see thousands of pages at the same time. So it's like a bee's eyes that can have almost 360 view of what is going on around. And it is able to connect all the dots. And so why is Meta, why are all these big companies pumping billions of dollars into it? Because that is truly the way to get to general purpose AI and super intelligence. So I think we are at the most exciting times in my eyes. We are seeing this transition from no AI or almost no AI to almost general purpose AI. And that is the biggest change in the history of intelligence. So was that helpful or did I go too technical?
I think that was super helpful. And it brings up a lot of other questions for me then. So, how does neuro-symbolic AI fit into all this?
Very good question. So we started working on large language models since 2021. The same time when I sold my last company, we had already started dabbling into it. But it was all in research. There was no product developed. We actually started to build our own LLMs as well, but it was too expensive. And being a startup, we just didn't want to do it. So we were happy with our NLP, but we had augmented our NLP with knowledge graph. Now, what is a knowledge graph? Knowledge graph on a knowledge model is essentially all these clinical concepts. Imagine a graph on a 3D connection. You have all concepts and they are connected to each other. So let's say there is metformin and the disease is diabetes. There's a connection that metformin is the medication for diabetes. So the connector, it is a medication, right? But there may be, it is a medication might be between many different medications and many different diseases, or the same medication for a different disease, or a disease with different medications, right? So you can have these large 3D network of medical concepts connected is a knowledge graph. So we took this knowledge graph and we were using it with NLP, which was giving us a pretty decent result. Our accuracy out of the box was about 65 to 70% in the code. In a computer-assisted coding, we are reading the document and saying, what is the CPT code over here that is billable. So you have to understand that here is the disease or here is the procedure and here are the medications. And based on that, there is a certain probability that this is a code that is associated with this procedure. Now, with the inherent problems of large language models are hallucination, then it would be the black box. And also large language models are built with all the knowledge. It could be knowledge not only of healthcare, it could be of aeronautics, it could be of mining industry, it could be of anything, right? Because that is how today you ask ChatGPT anything and we give you an answer. Our focus is in healthcare, and particularly in healthcare and risk adjustment. So how do you guide that all this knowledge is good for understanding of the world, but when it has to make decisions and predictions, it has to focus its knowledge only on the healthcare segment. And so we took our knowledge graphs or the large knowledge models and started very systematically embedding or connecting it with the large language models. And what that does, Shannon, is whenever it sees a clinical entity, it understands from the whole context, but then it refers back to our knowledge graphs and says, hey, what is the context of it? Is it contextually meaningful? What else does it get connected? And that, so in this, the neuro-symbolic. So neuro is the neural networks, which are the large language models, and the symbolic are the knowledge graphs. So we started working on this in 2021, and we have been funding several universities to do certain fundamental research, and we take those research and then we apply it only to our focus on risk adjustment. And that is a game changer. And we'll be announcing some outstanding results. Just to give you an idea, at best, I had seen natural language processing or NLP based output of codes, medical codes at about 65 to 70%.
Wow.
With Neuro-Symbolic, we are getting out of the box 92%. So that is unheard of when it comes to AI, particularly with NLP. So the future is not about using large language models, but rounding that large language models to the actual knowledge that it needs to refer to for making a decision. Was I clear on that? And then
You were. And I think that gives us great information because I think about, and I know we're headed to Rise West, but I think about as someone who's bought technology in the past and even visiting the vendor halls, I walk around and everyone has on their backdrop NLP, AI, large language models, and different things. Maybe you could give, and I know you said that NLP, and I've heard that NLP, especially in the beginning, was getting 60 to 70%. And that was everyone. And then there were coders that were being used to review the results to make sure that we were applying things correctly. What would you say to someone who is considering a tool or is going to Rise West and is going to walk the vendor hall? What are some questions or things that they might ask of any solution that they might be considering? How can you make them more informed buyers?
so that I think there is a lot of noise in the industry
Yeah.
because you go from any one vendor to the other vendor, you will hear the same terminology and the same results. And none of them, I can guarantee you, or none of them are making it up. Everybody is right. Because if you need to adopt a technology to automate or semi-automate your medical coding function, there is nothing else but NLP. If you have to travel from your home to work, the only mode you have is a car, suppose. You cannot go on a helicopter, you cannot take a plane, you cannot take a train. There is no public transportation, particularly in the suburbs, right? There may be in the downtown area, but so every person is going to go in a car. So NLP is that car to get to point A to point B. And the car will have its own limitations in terms of speed limit. Even if you are on the Autobahn, the car is not going to go around more than 100 or 120 miles an hour. That is the maximum threshold that it can go to. Now, suddenly you come up and say, hey, I'm going to transform this and have these drones where a human can sit in and go. The transportation mode has changed completely. Now, what used to take 30 minutes to get from your home to work, with a drone, you can get there in maybe 10 minutes because you don't have to go on the street. There's no traffic and you can go straight there. The speed, which was limited to 120, maybe now it goes at 300 miles because that is the entitlement of this. So that is a significant change. I'm not saying that NLP nobody was using, everybody used it because that was the only way to do it. The newer LLMs are still very unknown and the accuracy is not there. Particularly the problem of hallucination, ensuring that it is accurate, is not there. And so people are dabbling with it, and it will take a while. It will take a while. We were just ahead of time because we have been doing AI since 2009, 2010. We knew that. We had been working with various universities. And most importantly, we were just lucky to be where we are. But on the flip side, I tend to be extremely paranoid because even when we developed NLP in 2009, 2010, and we were early ones in the CSE market, within 3, 4, 5 years, everybody picked up and we were all same now. But now with the acceleration and compression of time, I think that the advantage that we will have with Neuro-Symbolic, it's a matter of 6 months, year maximum, somebody else will catch up. Because it's not that AI has become a big enabler. AI is no longer a moat in my eyes. It's not going to be that, hey, this company developed it and now nobody can touch it. Even look at, it's amazing. I'm going to digress a bit, but Gemini comes up with a new model, and then Claude comes up with a new model, and then OpenAI comes up with a new model. And when, let's say, OpenAI just came up with ChatGPT 5, right? And they are at the top of the world. In today's world, that competitive advantage is a matter of week. Somebody else will beat them within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, which used to be 3, 4 years is now weeks. So I think it's amazing because customers, when they are walking the floor at Rise West, I think these are great times for the buyer because they can come talk with individual vendors, understand what is the contrasting, what can be delivered, and meet their requirements in terms of, can you implement it this because the sweeps are coming up? Can you do it now? Second is, can you do it at the volume I want? Is the pricing correct? What is your support system like? How defensible are you, particularly in light of CMS's announcement on Red V audits, right? So they will have all these options and talk with the people has the best technology, best pricing, and they can trust the most. So it's a great time for a buyer, a bad time for vendors.
I think you brought up a really good point, and I'm glad you mentioned review audits because there's a focus there of making sure that if you're submitting a condition, that it is a condition that the patient has and that's actively being cared for. But you talked about hallucinations. Maybe you could talk about, again, that discriminate buyer. What would be things that someone might ask or consider or build into their discussions when they're evaluating a tool around hallucinations, and then making sure that those hallucinations aren't leading to opening it up, right, for greater liability or greater risk of being audited and having a code come through that isn't substantiated for the patient.
That's an excellent point because unless at this point of time, you have very sophisticated agents, AI agents, or you have really good, trustworthy coders, you won't be able to recognize hallucination because it will be so convincing. When it starts to generate, it'll be so convincing. It's like natural. It only made an error in one layer and that has propagated. So it becomes difficult to identify. I think the best thing that a vendor or a very smart buyer should do right now is ask for hedge, do a small POC. And there are several terms, that are important. And the way we are positioning it is, number one is, what is the trustworthiness of AI, right? How do we make sure it is trustworthy? Second thing that is very important is, with the newer models, the coder is going to transition from that monotonous grunt work to really an augmented AI teacher to make sure that AI is doing correctly and teaching the AI to do it correctly. We have been talking about assistive AI and augmentive AI, and people have been using those terms very loosely. NLP is assistive AI. It is assisting the coder because instead of the coder having to read 200 pages, it is taking them and saying, look at all of these. So if in a chart there are 10 codes, the NLP is showing all the 10 and the evidences, which every vendor will show. Here is the evidence, here's the code. But the coder has to look at all 10 of those, right? Because at 65% accuracy, you don't know whether it's correct or not. With Neuro-Symbolic, the difference is it is going from assistive to augmentive AI. So now the AI is going to come and say, I have looked at all these documents. Out of the 10 codes, here are the 8 codes that I feel are accurate. And the coder does not need to review them. So it would auto adjudicate those 8 codes. However, what we would want to do is the user should look at all those 8, continue to look at those 8 until they see that, hey, by looking at it, we are not finding any errors. And over time, build that trust. Like I'll tell you, Shannon, when we sign up for a new credit card, the first month we get our bill, we are going to look at everything. We'll look at it. I'm talking about general people. Somebody might look at it for 2 years. Somebody might look at it for 6 months. Somebody might look at it for the first 3 bills. But after that, they develop, hey, I think it's accurate. There's nothing wrong with it. So that trust is being built between the person and the credit card company. Just like that, the trust will be built between the coder and the AI. And once they are comfortable, they say, I don't need to see it. And even in that case, a good system would tell what is the probability or what is the confidence for that particular code. So the coder will now really move from being assistive, where they have to look at everything, to totally augmentative, because there are 2 codes that AI was not able to make a decision. And now the coder is saying, okay, I do not agree with this suggestion because of this reason. I do not agree with this, or I agree because of this reason. And it is teaching the AI to become better. So what happens is it went from assistive to augmentative AI. And that is what a smart person should look for. That is it truly going to get better with time? Is it truly going to augment the workload of my employees or my coders? And if it is able to do it, how much money am I going to save? Because imagine this, if a coder has to look at all the codes and they are going to spend 30 minutes looking at a chart, versus after 2, 3, 4 months, they are not going to look at 50%, 60%, 70% of the codes. That time is saved. Is the vendor going to work with them and give that money back to them? Money saving. Second, a good AI will find everything that needs to be built. The net new ads that we talk in risk adjustment should become natural. A good coder, human coder, will code everything that is codable and will not code anything that is not documented, right? That is what CMS wants. CMS wants to pay us. They want to make sure that you take the money that you deserve, just do not overcode. But they are not saying leave things on the table for us. No, you work for it, you get paid. So the newer technology should be like the best of the best coders, and should be like the best of the best CMS or OIG auditors. So then it can, all in one agent, that it can look at the code make sure that you are not leaving any money on the table. And as an auditor, saying that you are not out of compliance. And that is what agentic AI does. That is what neuro-symbolic enables. So they should be looking at how it is going to impact me in terms of my cost savings today, augmentation of my workforce, making them, instead of coders becoming miserable and stressed out, this frees them up. Look at things that matter. Is it going to make sure that I collect all the money that I should legally and rightfully collect? And is it going to defend any kind of overcoding from compliance perspective? And so if it does, that is what they should be looking at. And then prove it to me. How are you going to prove it to me? Here is my data set. Go show it to me. So I think that would be a good way in which if I was a buyer, I would do it.
I think those are great recommendations and made me think of something too. And I know we've had several conversations around this. And I think this is important is to find companies too that are always investing in getting better, right? And investing in their education and learning. And I know that you've been involved in a lot of research projects, aligning with universities, doing different work to make sure that the tool that you're putting out there is truly something, right, that the buyer, that those that are your clients can trust.
Yeah,
Maybe you could talk about some of those interesting projects and maybe some of the learnings that came out of that then went into, because I know we're going to talk here in a second about the tools and some of the solutions that you have at Rapid, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you've done to get there to develop your tools. But then again, like I said, invest in that learning and continue to add to the community. The community.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think at the start of this discussion, I said there are two things that really are important in my eyes. When I started to get out of my chemical engineering, education and healthcare. Combining the two is fantastic. My way of combining the two is, and when I was a grad student at UMass, I was funded by industries. So there were people who would fund a project to my professor. I would work on that project. And it was very meaningful for me as a student because I was working on projects that I knew the industry would learn from and utilize one day. And it was very meaningful for the industry because they were getting really cheap labor. Right? I was getting paid $8 an hour at that point of time. But I was able to put it on my resume. So it was a complete win-win. And since the day I graduated, my very first job, I funded UMass, a project over there. My second job, I funded Illinois Institute of Technology, MIT, and UMass, because that was my alma mater. And then when I started, my last job was with GE, where I was heavily involved in multiple. Purdue was one of them. MIT was one of them. We used to fund them. And when I started my company, the first institute I funded was IIT Bombay and Wright State University in Dayton. And what I got out of it, Shannon, is just mind blowing. And since then, we have been funding multiple universities, particularly in India, IIT, a bunch of IITs here. Now we are funding University of South Carolina and another one, which I cannot disclose at this point. But what we do is we give specific projects, but leave some of the creative part to the professor, because the professor is typically the principal investigator who we would, and they would hire postdocs or PhDs or master students. A lot of work that you will see being published over the next 6 months to a year will be way, way different. We are going to talk about trustworthy AI a lot. We are going to talk about accuracy in AI. We are going to talk about empathetic AI. All these are projects that they love to do. But the core research that I am interested in is going to be on neuro-symbolic, is going to be on large language models and small language models. And so those are all done in stealth mode because it takes a while. There's a lot of funding that goes into it. And then when it comes back, we have to now take our applied research within our company who are going to convert those into algorithms and then put it in production. So I think that a lot of people think that only large companies can invest in research. I think that's a fallacy. Yes, we are not going to invest in developing large language models. We are not looking into those fundamental frameworks, what OpenAI is doing, what Anthropic is doing. We are not into it. But taking those and purpose building what is important in risk adjustment, what is important in medical coding, what is important in CDI is something that we are going to focus on. So it's more applied research rather than fundamental research. And I've been doing it since I started my first company, and there's no way I'm going to stop doing it. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. So I know that a lot of that work, including your background, has gone into developing the tools and the solutions that you have at Rapid. And I have to be truthful in saying that there are things that I've seen that I've not seen elsewhere and have been particularly impressed with the thought that's behind the tools. I know that you've leaned on a lot of industry professionals to make sure. And Wanda and I, in our interview, talked about how I know your audit tool, right? It was created by auditors for auditors. And I think I've seen that across all the tools really that I've seen from you. I would love for you to talk about some of the offerings, some of the solutions that you have, why you saw them as important and adding to the capabilities that you see. I know you talked earlier about the importance of risk adjustment and the importance of healthcare, but why you felt those solutions needed to be created and what is it that's special about those that really contribute or add to solving problems that we have in the industry today.
So there are many different thoughts that came to my mind when you were talking. So I'll go and try to come together. One is educators. Now, I myself have been a mentor to a lot of startups. And what I try to do is tell them about my experiences, what had worked, what had not worked. And then if I have some knowledge, which is either industry specific or technical specific, then I would impart that. But mostly it is my journey that helps entrepreneurs. Similar to that, what I have found, and I found it even in my previous companies, is Shannon, you are a prime example of this. You have the breadth and depth that very few people, particularly vendors like us, would not have. Right? Means you have worked for large organizations like Optum. You have also supported startups and their product development teams. You have worked on the providers side. So you have seen that and you can connect the dots. And I see, just like you, Wanda is an amazing person. I see other ladies who have been like those industry stalwarts in my eyes. And when I came to Ryan National for the first time, this was in 2022, right? I just started my company and I launched in February, and I think February was Rise or February or March. And I met with you over there. I met with Michelle. I met with Deb. I met with Laura. I met with Anna. I met with all these. And you ladies were mediators or at the keynote or were the moderators of panels and sessions. And I was very clear that I need to get mentoring from this, not only me, but my team as well. And so a lot of you just jumped in and said, yep, we'll help you. Yes, that wasn't, it was like more of a community that here is a new person who has this desire, this passion. Let's impart what we have. And that helped me. So the very first few sessions I had were my entire team, my engineering team, and everybody was like learning the basics. What is risk adjustment? What is value-based care? What is fee for service? And that kind of collaboration is super important in growing. And if I have had experiences where there are competitors who also, we would come and talk. If there are things that I just cannot say, and there are things which we would not even patent because they are proprietary information, those I would not discuss. But the generalities of where to go, how to do it, we would absolutely talk about it. I have amazing friends made with almost all the vendors who come out there. We hang out together, right? So I think that collaboration is very important for the industry. On a slightly parallel concept, Shannon, I have no hallucination that my livelihood and my team's livelihood is because of this industry. It's because of risk adjustment, because of value-based care, because of my customers that we are able to put bread on our table, wear our clothes and have it fall on our head. When CMS came out with this 900% increase in audit, which is like every health plan, 35 to 200 enrollees from 2019 to current, all within 1.5 years. I could only see nothing but where the industry would start to get into trouble. And the trouble is because when they were doing 50 health plans a year and 35 enrollees, you can do it all on spreadsheet. You can do it with a small team. You didn't have to worry. Now everybody will be scrambling to get the same resources. Nobody has the tool. So one of the things that came to my mind is, what can I do for the industry? And so we already had a RAAPID concept and everything. We accelerated it and put an amazing tool together. And for the first payment year, any customer, we are just giving it away. We don't want to get any money from it. We want them to get started on this. Now, by doing that, at least for some time, they will have a breather. Now, again, I have to also be careful about my investors and my business. So after that, if we are good enough, they can buy it from us, but it's not mandatory. So I think that RAAPID tool that we have developed is something that is the need of the hour. And it spawned from the fact that people will not be able to do a good job, which CMS requires them to do, by spreadsheets and sticky notes. And Wanda was always with us. She loved it. She said, this is the way to do it because she has lived that side of the equation. So that is one product that will be launching at Rise West. And I invite all your audience to come and look at it and sign up. There are no strings attached with it. If you like it, use it. If you don't like it, that's perfectly okay. You use it for the time being till you get something else. That's okay too.
Before you go on, I just want to remind folks that are going to West that they can book a demo with you, but they have an opportunity to sit in on the round tables, which I believe are Monday evening at the end of the show day when they have the cocktail and networking hour. There's typically 3 rounds, 20 minutes. And so they can come and get a quick demo and attend your round table and see that. But if they're not at the conference, or if the conference just gets too crazy and too busy, which I can absolutely appreciate, there's so much to see and do, they can also book with you later. And I know we'll include the link to your company and how they can do that when we put this interview out as well.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate it. And I, as the CEO, I'm not going to sell it over here. That is not my job. But I do want to let people take advantage of it and see if it works for them. If it gives them ideas to develop their own, that's fine too. That's not bothering me.
And I'm always a proponent of, like what we were saying about education. If you're going to be in this industry, you should know what the capabilities are and what's available out there, at least from an awareness standpoint. And it may be something that you want to invest in. It may not, but at least what technologies are that you can bring to bear. Okay,
that is true.
Finish telling us about the other great things that you have.
So the other ones, we also, like every other vendor, until last year, were purely NLP-based AI and coding platform. But since we have been working on it and now the results are out, we have done a lot of internal POCs to prove again and again. So we will be launching our Neuro-Symbolic platform this time. So customers who are on the old one, they can continue using it. The Neuro-Symbolic is the new one, which will be a complete game changer. Just to give you an idea, as I said, comparatively, the NLP technology we had was at about 65 to 70% accuracy out of the box. And then when we started working on the customer data, that could go up to 85, 90% accuracy. However, if the template, the format, the colloquium, the abbreviations, anything changed, again, it would reset back to 65, 70%. It was highly dependent on the documentation we were getting. On top of it, customers had their own guidelines. So if the guidelines changed, or let's say the government changed from V24 to 28 or any other models, that would also impact the accuracy. So it would take a while to, again, if a government change came, we would put our entire team onto it and make those changes. But other than that, it would go from 65, 70 to 90. It could fluctuate, but it would just be hovering at best at 90%.
I was going to say, and just to clarify too for the audience, that 60, 65 to 70%, that's for the entire industry. And I think I've heard before folks claim as I'm walking through the vendor hall that theirs is much higher, but that's not necessarily so, that the industry on the whole is operating at around that 65 to 70% range. And so if someone's telling you that they're not, that would be a place where you could ask questions
Yeah.
to better understand what they're going to do to bring it up to a higher accuracy rate. Is that right?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Because if somebody, we have been doing since 2009, 2010, and multiple things, very successful. Last company, again, NLP based, continuing over here. Inherently, it is impossible to cross that mark unless the data is so clean that it comes in and it is 1 or 2 page documents. Okay. In that case, yes, it is possible. But in risk adjustment, we have to look at the conditional evidence. First of all, the provider has to be very specific and say that the patient has type 2 diabetes with this complication or whatever. And then on top of it, you're going to identify all the meet criteria and then connect it. Now, typically in NLP, you will have conditional somewhere or meet somewhere else. And you have to have that connection somehow that, hey, this meet is for this particular document or this particular verbiage. It is not that easy because the language, the grammatical errors, I've seen sentences that run on like crazy. I've not seen over 70%, maybe at 72%, 73%. The data is too clean, maybe 80%. But if somebody tells me that they are out of the box accuracy on a completely new medical record, which is a risk adjustment 50, 60, 70 page record, is above 90%, I would not trust it. I personally. Now, there may be companies, but I know that Amazon Comprehend Medical, neither nor Google have that capability today. So if somebody's better than that, more power to them, I think, but I don't know.
Well,
Neuro-symbolic. With neuro-symbolic, the biggest thing is the dependency on the document type is gone. So now instead of it looking at 1 or 2 paragraphs as the context window, we are able to look at the entire document. Even if the document is 500 page long, which we have sometimes, even then it is able to comprehend it. So number one is we do not require any data from our customers to train our models. This is out of the box. Then we emphasize a lot on the client's guidelines because that is where the subjectivity comes in. When our AI looks at it or our coders look at it, if they are not following exactly the customer's guideline, there would be an error. Sometimes you have seen that the customer has a certain guidelines, but they also don't know that they are in conflict with CMS guidelines, some of those. So we have to work very, very efficiently and in a detailed manner with the customer to ensure that the guidelines are correct. Once that is in place, then there is no dependency on the type of the data, the variety of the data, colloquial, abbreviations, all of this. So out of the box accuracy is very important. Now, the second thing that I might recommend your audience is when they do a POC, I have seen this a lot of times. Give the vendors, and when we used to do NLP, we would take, let's say, 100 charts, of which we would take 50 charts and create what is known as a training data set. So we would take 50 charts, run it through our NLP, fine tune the engine, make sure all the sections, the document type, everything is what we can understand. Make sure the colloquial, the language, the abbreviations are all fine tuned. Make sure the date of services on all of are identified. And then we would take the next 50 and do what is known as a test run. And that output goes to the customer. Now, we might also split that into 2 batches of 25 charts each, because after the fine tuning, we want one more for our research team to double check, and then we would give the output. And at that point, we would be pretty high, about 70, 80% accuracy, maybe 90% accuracy on that particular last 25. I have also seen certain vendors run it through the NLP and then give it to their coders, and the coders would clean it all up, and then submit the data to the customers. Means it's very normal, right? You want to win the business. So people, and I'm not going to comment on that, but it happens. And if particularly if the customer is asking that what is the final output and you are going to use your coders, then it's perfectly okay to do that. Because it also tests not only the technology, but also the coders capability, which the customer is looking for. So it's perfectly okay. This entire process would take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks because it takes a while. With Neuro-Symbolic, here is what I've challenged my team to do. If you're on the call with the customer and the customer says, we want to do a POC, I'd say, absolutely. Give me your 3 or 4 coders' email address. So at that time, while we are on the phone, we would generate their user ID and password on our system. And at the same time, we would send them on SFTP details to the person we are talking to, let's say the supervisor, and say, we just sent it to you while we are talking. Why don't you upload 25, 30, 50 records, charts on that SFTP? And while she's doing it, we have generated the user ID and password from the coders and sent it over. And so in about 15, 20, 30 minutes on the call, we'd say, okay, your charts are ready. Your coders can go log in and look at the results. And I can guarantee you, if they follow the CMS guidelines, now we will not follow because we have not collaborated on the customer's guidelines. But if they are following the CMS guidelines, that out of the box accuracy will be at 90%. So that entire POC can happen in 30 minutes. And that the reason is not we are smart. The reason is the technology enables us to do that. And so there are significant advantages, particularly, I was talking with certain very large enterprises, multiple systems providers, and they are very scared of, I don't want my data to go out. I don't want to have people get access to my information, obviously for very obvious reasons. And all of that, I don't want you to ever use my data to train your models. And we say, we don't need any of those. We don't need your training. We don't need this. We don't need this. It's yours. And one of the things that I did not mention, Shannon, but a big advantage to large enterprises and large health plans, if they are a Microsoft shop and they are on Microsoft Azure, we can put our entire technology within their instance in Azure. So their data never has to leave their instance. So let's say if there's a Blue, which is on Azure and their entire data is on Azure, we will be able to put our system or our technology in Azure in there and behind their firewall. So now they can do all their coding and everything. The data never goes up. And we have no access to that data either. So we are not training our system after that. So a lot of advantages good technology can bring to the market. And that is where the industry should be looking at, that as we progress, technology should not bog us down. There should be an enabler. Does that answer your question?
It does, 100%. And I appreciate what you were saying about with other systems doing that work and then bringing in coders, you're able to get it more accurate at the beginning. And so truly, again, going back to what we were saying around, there's accuracy, right? You're making the most of time. So you're not having to bring in resources that are going to add to that time in order to review those files, which I think is so important. And then you're also liberating resources. So making it so those coders can work to top of license and work in a way in which they're truly needed, which I think is important.
Yeah.
So Chetan, you talked about agentic, and I'm just curious, how does all this work? Can you talk a little bit more about how you're using this technology and applying it to records review and risk adjustment, and again, making that contribution to the industry?
Yes, Shannon, that's a very sharp question because we talked about NLP, we talked about generative AI, but agentic, which is the important thing. So agentic is, we enable one kind of a AI bot, or we call it an AI agent, a AI persona. And let's say I create this and say, okay, this AI, you are the world's best medical coder. And here is all the knowledge that a medical coder has. based on your education, based on your experience and everything. And that is all in the knowledge graph. And now, so let's say world's best coder, you are one agent. Go into the system, this particular document, and find me all the evidences which are codable. Okay. And find me not only codable, but point to the evidences as well. Now, to do that, it is going to use one LLM. Suppose, let's say that is Anthropic. Okay. Then I tell another agent and say, you are also the world's best agent. You are also the world's best coder. Go and do it. But for your world knowledge, do not use Gemini. Then I tell a third agent that you are also the world's best agent, but I want you to use OpenAI. But I want you to use OpenAI with liberty and creativity. So you can be a bit more liberal in looking at codes. So these 3-4 agents are looking at the documents only in terms of what are the billable codes. So that's one, those are 3 agents, and they are scanning through it and they give an output that, hey, the first agent says, I used Anthropic and I found these codes. The second says, I used Gemini, I found this. The third says, I used OpenAI and I was very liberal, let it go. I used creativity that it could be this code or it could be that code, and these are the codes I found. So it's not very deterministic, the third one. Now we take all those codes and say, have another agent say, if these were the codes, go and find all the evidences from this. So now, and you are the world's best analytic person who can cross-reference from code books, from the codes to the evidences and what the meet evidence. So it goes and does that. Now there will be 2 or 3 agents like that. And then there will be discrepancies. Some says, no, this code is there. Some says, no, this should not be there, right? So then we have a couple of judges and say, you judge who is correct and who is wrong. And you are the world's best statistician. So it is judging. Now we might also have one agent and we say, you are the OIG's compliance officer. Give it a persona. You are the world's best RAAPID auditor. And all the knowledge of RAAPID auditor is given to you. Now go and see all these codes and say, are they valid? Or could it be debated and penalized by CMS or DOJ or WIDE? And so it looks at it and says, I don't believe in this code. Now another agent says, it says no, what do you think? So you can see all these different 8, 10, 12 agents working one after the other, looking at the same piece of information from different angles. And then it gives an output. Now, this is the power of agentic AI. And so not only we will not leave, I told you, right, we will not leave any code which is billable. So you collect all the money, but it will not allow you to code anything that does not have evidence. And wherever it is not able to make a decision, where AI, all these agents are like still fighting amongst themselves, that is given to the coder and say, Miss Coder, help us. What do we do over here? And whatever action the coder takes, that is now given back to all these agents so they can learn from it. So then there is the orchestration. It's known as AI agent orchestration. And when you do that here, so what happens, Shannon, is, and I'll give this example, the cost of technology just increased by about 6 to 8 times. Because all these LLMs are super expensive. They are not cheap, right? They are very expensive to use. And you have multiple times you are using it. So the cost goes up. But the cost of labor goes down. So you now have coders who are focused. You don't have to have an army of low quality coders who are going to do it. And then you have another person, a third person. You don't do that. All these are agents who are doing it. And then you have top-notch coders who you trust, like a QA team, who's going to help and validate or do QA or do the augmented part only. So if the total, I give it an analogy. Let's say if you wanted to dig a large hole and you go and hire 1,000 hole diggers, 1,000 people. Now each person is 99 cents. And 1 cent is for the shovel that they bring. So your total cost is $10 for the shovels and $990 for the labor. So your cost is $1,000. When you go to Neuro-Symbolic or Agentic AI, you are only bringing 10 people. They bring shovels just to tap things and make sure everything is done, but you are bringing an excavator, which is like $500, $600. So the excavator is able to do it much more precise, faster, better, but the cost is much higher. But the total cost, $1,000 versus $600, 40% savings. So it's very interesting that again, I've had discussions with a lot of prospects where they say, why is the technology cost higher? And they just cannot understand it. The total cost goes down, but technology is higher. But what we gain out of this is compliance. We gain accuracy. We gain not a single, people talk about first pass, second pass. We only talk about only pass. There is no first pass, second pass. You just do it once and that's it, only passed. And over time, I am very certain that in a matter of a year to 2 years, the cost of this LLMs will drop tremendously. And so now you have the advantage of large language models, agentic AI, neuro-symbolic AI at lower cost, but much higher fidelity. So you asked a very important question, and that's why I elaborated a lot on this one.
Yeah, I love that. And I have to tell you, I'm going to challenge you. I am a believer in that first pass, second pass. I do believe in doing that second level review. But talk to me, maybe I can be convinced otherwise, because I think that there's, again, savings of time and money. Talk a little bit more about how the work that you're doing then, because you said that you're finding information in the data to support the code or not to support the code that was found. Talk about how the work that you're doing and the technology that you're bringing to bear is defensible.
Very, very good point. And I'd like to get your opinion. Why do you believe in first pass, second pass? The reason is because when I talk about agentic AI, one needs to understand what an agent is, what an AI agent is. When you use a chat GPT prompt, the very first thing you say is, as my advisor, financial advisor, as my technical advisor, as my confidant, as my emotional support psychologist, whatever you use it. And then you say, this is my problem. So you are giving the AI agent narrowing down to say, you have to act like this and you get the knowledge and a persona of that, right? What we do in Neuro-Symbolic, it's the same exact thing. We are saying, as the world's best medical coder, who understands risk adjustment like no other. And then we just don't tell it because in LLMs, when you give it, it is now relying on the knowledge that is available out there, which could be conflicting at times. We say as this coder, world's best coder, but here is your knowledge as a coder. And this is imagine a medical coder goes to coding school for 3 years. And all the textbooks that have been used by the medical coder, all the lexicons, all the vocabulary, all the code books, everything is embedded in their knowledge, in that knowledge graph. On top of it, any experience they have had as a coder, we know that all the edits used to come out from government, all the guidelines, CMS guidelines, all of that is also embedded as knowledge. So we are not just telling it, take the persona and find the knowledge yourself. We are saying, take the persona, the knowledge is here of the world's best medical coder. Now you go and look it up. So whatever it's going to find, it is going to find from the eyes of the world's best medical coder. And there are 3 such coders looking at the same data. Now, on the flip side, you are also saying, as the world's best auditor. So, you take Wanda. Now, again, there will be knowledge which is not covered in textbook. But in reality, Shannon, most of the knowledge is documented somewhere. Even things that we call as intuition are far and few in between. But typically it is our background knowledge, whether we got it from education, a conference, or through conversations. But that knowledge is what we go back. And that is embedded in the large language models in our neuro-symbolic part. And so when it looks at it, it can become highly defensible. So when we say that accuracy is 92% and let's say the AI adjudicated 8 codes, we are we want the coder to double check it for trust, for building the trust. But other than that, it is as accurate as it can be because it has looked at from all this. So the defensibility is very high when it comes to agentic. It is not even close when it comes to NLP because NLP is saying that this code I'm 60 to 65 to 70% accurate. It's not that this 75% I'm 100% sure. So there's big difference between the newer technologies and what was out there. And people will adopt it. I'm pretty sure you'll see every vendor within the next, if not now, at Rise National next year, start talking about some form of neuro-symbolic. They will talk about RAG, they'll talk about LLMs, they'll talk about agentic AI, they'll talk about that. Because it's the natural progression. People will do it. I just hope that by the time they talk about it, we are talking about something else.
I'm sure. No, I'm sure about that. And you made me think too that I like that you can put in the perspective because that prevents you from, say, prioritizing a source that might not be a reputable one. And so you can, as the best RAAPID auditor, you can prioritize, say, coding clinic over something that maybe was written in a blog. And as you do that, it helps them protect against, again, the hallucinations that we talked about earlier and gets you to that higher accuracy rate. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so I have two questions for you, Shannon. One is
Sure.
from
Turn to
the
the table. All right.
yeah. The reason is means again, it's when I look at you and when I meet with you, I'm just looking at okay, what am I going to learn today? So when you look at this industry, if you were to say that these are the 2 or 3 major pain points and vendors are not solving it today, what would those be?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know that vendors aren't solving it, but I think one of the pain points that still persists is the lack of interoperability and access to data. You have data that's out there and it's not standard or it's not clean. And I think that if we had access to data in a way that we could share that data with one another, that would improve things. Because I've worked with a lot of platforms where we've taken in data, and we had to help write the crosswalks, but where the technology vendors weren't necessarily aware of how data comes in differently. And so you have all this data coming in and it sits there, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
we're saying with the connections. The other piece that I would say is behind that, and that's the documentation. So to your point earlier about, and I was thinking to myself, I spend a lot of time in my business working with physicians, talking about documentation and making sure it's robust. I think that there's opportunities there. And with the technology, right, that we have, I think that there are opportunities to improve that and make sure that the patient is appropriately documented.
Makes sense.
And then the other piece that I would say, I'll just add that I typically think of 3 things that we can push on in order to make value-based care successful. So technology, and I mentioned with the data, physicians around documentation. And then I would say the other piece would be patients. So communicating and working with patients so that they access the healthcare system in appropriate ways so that, again, they're getting the follow-up care, they're getting the care, the preventative care, those types of things that they need, that they're seeing their physician on a regular basis. And again, not showing up to the ER if they don't need to, seeing the PCP during normal business hours, using telehealth to get care and treating conditions appropriately and getting that education and engaging with their own healthcare in appropriate ways.
Those are super, super important point because as a patient, I want good care, but I just don't show up at my appointment. What good is that? That's not going to help. Thank you. That was helpful. Do we still have some time? I've got 2 more questions if you go.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
we do.
one is you mentioned that you are a believer in second path. Tell me.
I might change that based on what you said.
After you see the results, don't take my word for it. Yeah. But
Yes.
why do you think typically or generally second path is important?
We always did them because we always found that there were additional there was a couple things. I always did it because I always found that there was a difference. It wasn't that the vendors that I was using weren't doing a good job. It's just that there were always opportunities to find different things. And sometimes we found codes that weren't supported, and then others we found codes that were. But I felt like it also provided that level of due diligence so that I could say to CMS and OIG and the health plan or whoever was auditing me, that I could say to them, here are the steps that we took, the rigor that we applied in order to review. Similar, I think, to you in this aspect, my background is in research. And you, when you're bringing together information to then be interpreted and add to or create this, I want to be careful of using the word story because it doesn't mean that it's made up, but there is some nuance to it. And I tend to be a postmodern researcher. So I tend to be more believe research and data to be subjective. And so I feel like I can say that here are the steps that I took. And even though maybe something isn't supported, I still did the best that I could with tools that were available to demonstrate that I did believe that this condition was true for the patient, if that makes
Very,
sense.
very profound. So
Thank
one
you.
of the things we can do on the side, Shannon, is we believe that the AI agents are
Yeah.
those coders, are those auditors. They are just technical. They are not humans. That's about it. But they are now, in terms of their capability, very similar in terms of their understanding of the data, in terms of identifying codes or what have you. So maybe we can do a side by side research and say,
Yeah.
if, because in that case, truly, we are doing 7 passes. It is the 8th one or the 7th one which is making the final judgment. So what I'd love to do is single pass, dual pass versus AI agents. Does it really require it? Because it is like a coder who is trained on this, but not human, not breathing at this point of time.
And the thing is, if it's sophisticated and how much it's changed, like you're sharing, that you have that level of rigor, you have that level of diligence that you're applying. And so I definitely think that can be a benefit, but that would
Yeah.
be interesting to see.
Yeah. I think
And
we can
agree.
go, we can do our co-author paper on that one
Okay.
to
I
see
would
it.
love that.
And
That
so
would be
that's one.
great.
And the last question I had is one thing that I have not understood, and we touched on it last time. We can take it offline as well. Is people still do date of service wise coding? They want to look at this date of service with the claim. Was it there or not? Was it there for each one? CMS does not need it. CMS says if the patient has disease 1 and you have shown that you captured it and you are managing it, we are happy. We don't need to see it for each day. My worry is this: there may be a provider who mentions it casually but does not document it properly because that's not something he's interested in. Like a specialist, he's not going to talk about all the chronic disease, but he might mention casually, while an endocrinologist will mention something very deep and what needs to be done. So if you look at date of service, you'll find the accuracy drop very quickly and create a lot of confusion. It'll be busy work, but very heavy grunt work for the humans for no reason. And so I think what we do in Neuro-Symbolic is we look at every date of service, every claim, we look at everything. So it is happening at the date of service level, but when we present it to the coder, the human, we are decluttering all that noise and just presenting your signal that, hey, we found this on this date of service. Here's the evidence. If you are not happy, we found the same thing on a different date of service, on a third date of service. So we can show it, but we only want to present once. And once they accept it, we suppress all the rest of it because it's not necessary. So what are your thoughts? Why do people still do date of service?
I love that you brought that up. And I am always fighting with vendors when I make requests to do reviews because I want every data service. And they're like, why do you need that? And I want to look at the entire record. And I think that goes with the larger theme of what OIG is saying around follow up. and making sure that if a patient has diabetes, they should be seeing the doctor on multiple occasions. And how can you look at one particular instance? You really need to look at the wider swath, if you will, of treatment within that given year. And as long as it's a face to face visit and it meets that and the doctor's following it and you have those things documented, that should be enough. I think the reason why it got that way, and I want to be careful because I don't want to discount it, but I think for some folks that there are those that see the forest and those that see the trees. And I think that we need to, and the tools that we're being given, like Agentic AI, Neuro-Symbolic AI, allow us to see the forest and comprehend it. It's not so large that we feel overwhelmed. I think for those that saw the trees, and hopefully this analogy is landing for folks, but for those that see the trees, they're looking at that specific encounter because it's encapsulated. They can see the boundaries of it. And so it's easier, I think, and that's not to discount it or say that it's less than, but it's just easier to review and consider it as to whether or not you have all those components there.
Sure.
So I think what happens is folks take information and they take snippets too. Like they hear things like when CMS says you need to have an encounter, or they hear that they need particular documentation. There's just things that they hear and it's very compartmentalized. And so that's how it gets assessed, is looking at that one to one.
No,
But
I
I'm
think
with you. I think that if we're talking about, and I really think the theme behind what OIG is saying when I hear them speak at the various RISE conferences and the information that comes out, and as I look at different writings that are coming out from that office, that the emphasis is really taking care of patients. Well, if that's the case, you shouldn't look at any one particular encounter. It should be all of those encounters in total and looking over the course of time for that patient. And for now, maybe it's the year, right? Because that's what coding guidelines say. But I think even at some point we might start looking over even larger periods. But I agree with you. I don't think that, and we used to come across this. I'll just share with you. I had a health plan when I was managing end to end risk for a very large provider group that was global risk. And we would get audits, and the health plan would give me these dates of service, and they would do these things where I learned pretty quickly. As they would give us the audit, they would give us new lists. They would change the dates. And it was very confusing. And so what we started doing as a team is I would say to my coding team, go and look at the entire year for the patient. And that's what we would do. And so in order to answer that audit, we didn't answer it by date of service. We answered it by the entire year looking for that condition.
perfect.
And in many instances, like you said, we were able then to present many dates of service. And in that way, I know in my interview I mentioned with Wanda how there was a health plan that wanted to take, we had 16 IPAs that I was managing. There was a million to $1.5 million in recoupment that they were trying to take, and they weren't even our largest health plan. We were at risk with, I want to say 13, maybe 15 health plans at that time. So this is one of them. And so that would have been pretty significant. But because we were able to present that patient did in fact have that condition, and we were able to look at the medical record over the entire year, not just the particular date of service that the health plan chose. And again, we weren't doing anything inappropriately. There's reasons why, right? Something might get waylaid in claims data, but in that way, we were able to defend ourselves
Perfect.
at that time.
I think that's a brilliant answer. And what I would like to do again offline is have a research on that too,
Sure.
because I believe we go back to the spirit of value-based care and say, this is what we need to do in risk adjustment.
Yes.
For that, you have to look at, and again, the AI agents are looking at every date of service. So it's not that. But imagine this, means this burnout or aggression is not just physicians. I have worked with coders since 2013, and I see coders and before that medical transcriptionists. They don't have a good life. They are under a lot of stress, particularly on time and accuracy. And it's unbelievable. They do all this grunt work. So if we can take all of that and say, okay, you just focus on this, If you're not happy, there is another date of service you can look at. So we are not forcing you. But once you are happy that you have enough evidence, both the meet criteria, temper, whatever, and the conditional, then you don't need to look at the same thing 3 times in the year. It's a waste of your time. We'll do something on that. But no, I think that was very helpful. Anything else, Shannon? This was such a good podcast. I hope your audience really enjoys it as much as I did.
I think they will. Chetan, I want to thank you again for giving your time and appearing in the One Take studio today. I know I've learned a ton, and I'm sure our listenership has too. All the differences between the various technology that we hear is out and about, and then being able to discern what's important when we're looking at tools to help us do the work that we're doing. And then also, too, looking at what's coming, what all the technology and the advancements that you're working with over at Rapid and developing and how the industry may change. And I think that these are important and helpful changes, given a lot of the challenges that I know that several of us are thinking around V28, around RADV. Want to give a call out again to the audience to check out the solutions and technology that's coming out from Rapid. If you haven't seen what they're doing, do stop by their booth at Rise West. Do sit in on that round table. And if you have an opportunity also too, you can always book a demo. You don't have to be in attendance at Rise West. I know that they'll be very giving of their time and willing to show you what they're working on. And definitely think that these are opportunities for us to push the industry forward. So again, Chetan, thanks so much for being here today.
And thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And it was truly a pleasure and to discuss all the work we are doing and also learn from you as the industry expert. It gives me ideas where we need to go and what we need to do to serve our customers even more.
I love it. Can't wait to hear more. All right. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.